So you can probably just turn that a little bit closer. Yeah,
What?
that's amazing. Perfect. So can you remind me your name first?
Karl Schoenberger.
Karl. Oh, true. You have a name because you told me you are from Germany as well. No?
Well, German was my first language, but I was born in northern Alberta. My parents, both my parents, came from Germany.
Oh, okay. In what year did they come in Canada?
My mother in 1928 and my dad in 1929.
Wow. Did they come here for a specific reason?
Well, in my dad's case, he thought something terrible was going to happen over in Europe.
He was right, right?
It seemed like he had a premonition, and he wanted to get out of there.
Interesting.
I'm not sure, but my mother had already had, I think, a couple sisters that were in Canada, and that was something that I guess she was a little bit adventurous or whatever, I don't know. And my parents ended up meeting in northern Alberta, where I actually grew up to, well, fairly close to where they met, actually.
And so your dad had a feeling that was he just like feeling this himself, or was it something in the country? Like, how did he know that like something was going to happen? Like,
I don't think he ever elaborated on this, but he
had
just
the
felt
feeling.
he had this premonition or whatever, that feeling that things were going to get ugly, and well, this was really before Hitler came to power, but anyway.
Yeah, and that's interesting. He made a pretty good call. He did. How did you? What did you do growing up in Alberta? What was your go-to hobbies or sports or?
Sorry, my what?
What were you doing for fun when you grew up in Alberta?
Well, I grew up on a farm, and I did things like we were breaking land, and we were picking roots, picking rocks. We had lots of animals. Had to milk cows, and we had pretty well every farm animal you can think of, and there was lots of hard work.
Yeah.
And my father was a very tough disciplinarian.
Yeah. What did you think? So, like, you learned pretty early on discipline and hard work?
I certainly did.
From how you perceived this as a young age, from now today, what was the difference from this the how you grew up and this influence and working in a farm, and like from how you were feeling about all this as you were as a teenager in it, or a kid? How different were you feeling about this then from now? If that makes sense.
Well, I still feel that everyone should work hard, and you know, have goals that they want to reach, and you know, don't depend on others to look after you. Look after yourself and your family. That's sort of what is ingrained in me, and so I probably don't really feel any different about when I was much younger than I do now, about that if you work hard, you'll succeed.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that's a pretty good lesson to get early on, for sure. Did you then transfer this after? Did you work then as a young adult in the farm as well, or then did you leave to do another career or something else?
well, I could have stayed on the farm. There was 9 boys
Oh, wow.
and one girl in the family, and of the 9 boys and the 1 girl, nobody was interested in taking over the farm when my parents were going to leave it.
Yeah.
So, but for a number of years, I did work fairly close to home in an apiary. You know, you're going to ask me what's that?
Yeah.
Are you going to ask me that?
Yeah, exactly. I didn't understand the word.
I worked for a company that had 3,000 beehives,
Oh, interesting.
and I probably got stung thousands of times too. And anyway, it was a very interesting job. It was a hard job. It's become much more mechanized now. But I mean, I could talk for hours about my experiences there. But anyway, it was hard work. But anyway, then something that probably very few people nowadays would experience. As soon as I started working out, when it came to payday, my parents were ready to take my check. Oh, here, you can have $1 or maybe $2 or whatever. And then the very sad part was that, and this was mostly in the summertime or weekends or whatever, at first, when I was going to school, and then some of my classmates would say, you know, they had a pickup or something, and I guess you're hoarding all your money. Well, I was giving everything I earned to my parents, and which actually it's something I really thought about a lot because that that's one big mistake I think they made. A couple of my brothers, they left home right away, and then they managed to keep the money that they made. But anyway, my parents really didn't show us how to handle money because we didn't have any money to handle. And it had a negative effect on my life later on, which I recovered from. But I had some tough struggles because when I first really had money on my own, I was very generous with my money and you know, bought people lunch or whatever, or you know.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, that makes sense. In this beehive, it was to produce honey, or
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Just to give you an example, do you know what a 45-gallon barrel is?
No.
Well, it's
yeah. Sorry, yeah.
Well, one year we had 750 45-gallon barrels of honey.
Oh wow. Holy.
The honey went to Europe and Japan and all over the place. We shipped it to a place called Billy Bee Honey in Toronto. Some went to a place in Vancouver, and Alpha Honey in Red Deer, Alberta, and whatever.
Yeah. Were you? Because I remember, because I have a grandfather that was doing this as well, but just at a small scale at his house, and I remember picking up picking up the structure. I don't know the words for that. In the honey, like they build, right?
Their comb, honeycomb.
Yeah, and I remember you could eat this and just like.
Oh yeah.
And then spit the thing.
Oh yeah.
I remember this, and I was
lots of people did that,
and it was super good. Like it's.
Yeah. A lot of people thought I was a very sweet person.
Yes, I confirm. So, and then after this, did you stay for a while at the in this? Or?
Actually, the work was mostly they started in the spring. We used to get about 1,000 hives at one time, and we'd have them in a field, and then we distribute about 40 or 50, and you had to move them early in the morning when the bees were in the hive, and then we had to be careful because the bees would get quite riled up, and anyway, then in the summer months it was very busy because we were collecting honey. As the bees were making honey, we would take off. It's called a super, which had the honeycombs in. we actually we made the frames, and we had a sheet of honey, of rather wax, that had imprints on it that the bees built out. And I'm not going. I got to be careful. I'm going to start talking a whole bunch of. Anyway, it's just incredible what bees do, and I'll just tell you one little thing that kind of stands out in my mind when I was working with bees. A couple times a mouse got into a hive. Well, of course, it ended up dying. They would sting it to death. And then they built a coat of wax around it.
Oh, wow.
Like to seal it. It's so. And then I'll just make a brief comment that the bees were actually, when I was involved in it, was they all came from California. And some of you might have heard of killer bees that escaped from, I think it was in Brazil. And they started moving into California. Then at some point, this was after when I was no longer in the bee business, but the Canadian government stopped the importation of bees. And then they started, Vancouver Island, which has a much warmer climate than northern Alberta and northern BC, they started getting bees from some beekeepers on the island, but they weren't ready they couldn't get them near as early as they could from California, and they charged way more money, and so actually what a lot of beekeepers started doing, they all had big warehouses. They started keeping bees over winter in their warehouses, and what they had to do is they had to be at temperature which was right around freezing. If it was that way, they would eat very little honey, and it wouldn't cost a bunch of money to keep them, and so things changed quite a bit in that regard. And anyway, then finally in the fall of '67, I decided that I've go in the same direction as most of my older brothers, which was move to Edmonton, and anyway, I found a job in a poultry plant, and as I did various jobs, but mostly picking orders, and that's what I did for a number of years while I was in Edmonton. Then I moved to the coast, in which I sort of still stayed in the same business, but I became a truck driver and a dispatcher, and I did a number of other things,
Nice.
But all along in my life, music was a big part of my life.
Oh, really? Nice.
I remember this radio station from Peace River, Alberta, called CKYL. When I was in grade 4, came to our school and recorded our choir. And a few days later, on a Sunday, we were supposed to be on the radio. And in those days, we had a radio that was roughly about the size of a regular car battery, and the battery for the radio was about the same size as the radio. Anyway, the battery died, and so I was devastated. I didn't get to hear our choir on the radio. But I belonged to, in my adult life, I belonged to at least 20 different choirs in BC and Alberta.
Nice. So you're a singer?
Pardon?
You're a singer?
A singer? Yeah, I think some of the people might consider me a singer. Yeah. Okay. And then I actually started taking a course in radio broadcasting.
Oh, nice.
In the late '60s, and with this Columbia School of Broadcasting, and I did a few simple things after. There was some of it was correspondence, and I had to do a sample. I'd go to actually a studio to do a sample newscast and weather forecast and a commercial and whatever. And I passed, but then when I started digging into it, then I found out that unless, at least at that time, unless you were well known, this was not a very good paying job. So,
Yeah.
Anyway.
What do you like the most about music? Why do you think it's such a big thing for you?
Well, I think I discovered at a very young age, and I certainly found it out more as I got older, that music is good therapy. And I've often believed that music is a universal language, and it can bring people together. I tend to be kind of loud when I sing. Somebody might agree with that, I certainly encourage other people to sing, at the present time, it's very strange. At one time here in Vernon, I've lived in Vernon for about 12 years now, I guess. I belong to 4 choirs. At the moment, I don't belong to any choir. But I come to a group here on Tuesdays that we sing. Anyway, I've seen a movie about what music can do to people that have Alzheimer's and dementia. I sang in choirs where we went and visited a lot of elderly people that were not very healthy and whatever, and lifted up their spirits and sometimes I used to watch them, and as I'm singing, so how are they reacting? And then one time we were singing Christmas carols, and this older gentleman, he had tears rolling down his cheeks, and I actually had to turn away because I can get very emotional myself, and I had to turn away. But I'm convinced that music is just a wonderful thing, and
yeah.
I just wish that there was more peace in the world, though. I mean, the lady that was here before, she talked a little bit about that, but anyway, I guess I should be waiting for you to give me some questions.
No.
Because sometimes I start rambling and.
I was gonna ask one more thing. I really like this one. What if you would have the opportunity to say one thing, and you would have the entire world that would be listening to you? What would you say?
To the world. Well, I think if everybody really wants to, they can work out their differences. We all have our certain beliefs and feelings and whatever, but are they insurmountable? I don't think they are. I think if people, if they want peace and they want to get along, I really think that can be accomplished. But sadly, a lot of people are driven by greed, and they want more and more all the time, and so it's the world at the present time looks quite gloomy, and I don't know if it's going to change much in the near future.
What do you think would be one thing that you would change in this society that would help the direction of all that, if you would have something in mind?
Well, I've never really had a political ambition, so
not necessarily politically, but like, what would be something? It can be just it can be, what could it be? It could be anything that you think could help improve people as a society, like something we could do, we could say, or like if there's anything that comes in your mind.
I think right now, and this only doesn't only apply to Canada, but I think a lot of places in the world, a couple of them, the really urgent things that have to be addressed is drugs and homelessness, and there's so many people in so many places that are on the street, and and some of them have mental issues or drug issues. I know there are also some that they find that the kind of life they want to live. They could be educated perhaps to try and get a real job and get off the streets. But and then of course, as we all hear in the news, housing is in desperate need all across the country, and then of course it's getting so expensive to buy a house and whatever, and especially in the big cities where most of the work is.
Yeah.
So it's a tough struggle, and
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, these are all things that, yeah, I do resonate with this as well. I think I do believe that we are going in a direction where people are more and more, like, these problems are getting so big that we won't be able to keep avoiding them, and that we will need to actually do something about it, because it's going to be too big that we won't be able to ignore it. I think we'll get to this point, and then it will get better. I think it will get very worst until it would get better, until we have no other choice to make it better.
yeah, that's right.
Sometimes that's what we need as a society to be able to change and evolve, I feel like. But anyway.
I'm finished.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're good. Thank you.
That wasn't really that scary.